Not much feels worse than the feeling of standing in front of a bunch of your coworkers and thinking to yourself, oh my God, any moment now they're all going to realize what just a terrible hire I was. That feeling is called imposter syndrome. It's very normal. It happens to almost all of us. And today I'm going to talk about ways that you can make it go away. My name is Tom, and I run the Executive Career Accelerator here at Vertical Motion, where we help people find, land, and excel in their first or next executive role. If that's interesting to you, follow this video, or you can also follow me over on Instagram at TomCoxVM. But with that, let's talk about imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome sucks. It's that feeling of anxiety and dread and fear that you get when you are thinking to yourself in the back of your mind that I don't really deserve to be here. I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm kind of in over my head, and nobody should listen to anything I have to say. I can tell you a lot of people, in fact, almost everyone I've ever worked with has felt exactly this way at some point in their career or in their life. And so it's okay. It's very normal. And there are ways to get over imposter syndrome. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. But I wanted to just dive in a little bit into my own personal experience with imposter syndrome, what it did, and how I was able to overcome it. Several years ago, about 20 years ago, my wife and I had just gotten married, and we had just moved to Atlanta for a new job. We moved from Washington. And we got here, we bought this beautiful home, and I started this amazing job at this really cool startup company that went from 30 employees to 800 over the next 2 years. So I got in pretty early. It was a really exciting opportunity. The problem is when I got there, the first week, I had no idea what I was doing. And it was the first time in my career where I had walked into a situation that I just didn't know what I was supposed to do. And I knew that I needed time to figure it out, but it was a fast-paced, fast-moving organization, and everybody was just moving around with their hair on fire. People were working on 6 projects at the same time, and they wanted to hand me 3 or 4 in my first week. And I just remember feeling, oh my God, what have I done? Like, they're going to fire me, and now I'm going to not know how to pay for this beautiful home that I just bought for my wife and me to settle into in Atlanta. And I'm going to have to move back to Washington and figure out how to get my old job back. It was an awful feeling of just absolutely like, I don't belong here. I'm not worthy of this. And I remember lying in bed, staring out the window, thinking to myself, like, who am I to do any of this? And so it was a really rough moment for me right there, that first week or two. The spoiler is that over the next several weeks and months, I eventually got a whole lot more comfortable in that environment and wound up becoming one of the leaders in that culture. And I really enjoyed my time there, and it really set my career in the direction that I wanted it to go. So in the end, it worked out just fine. But boy, that moment there where I was lying there in bed thinking to myself, like, they're going to know that they made a mistake. They're going to figure it out very quickly, and they're going to get rid of me. And so I think this is, all of us have this inner critic that we listen to. I have an external one, it's my mother-in-law. But besides that, the inner critic is the one who tells you all of the things you would never say to another person. This inner critic is a voice that is, basically looking at your faults only. It's like when we see a picture of ourselves on someone else's iPhone, it's like, wow, you got that view of me? Really? You got my double chin? Thanks. But it's like nobody is looking at that. In fact, most of us are only looking at ourselves in that picture. We're not looking at other people. And if we are, we're thinking, I'm so glad I saw this person, or I'm so glad this person was in this picture with me. We're not thinking about their flaws in that picture. Your internal critic is just this yammering voice that tells you over and over and over again, you're not worth it, you're not worthy. And so there are ways to deal with that inner critic. Imposter syndrome affects everybody, from the president of the United States to famous actors. There are stories of actors, A-list actors out there who can't watch their own movies because they can't stand looking at themselves on screen. They don't like the way they look or sound, or they just don't feel comfortable. They're amazing A-list actors, but they don't feel comfortable, looking at themselves because that inner critic takes over, and then that destroys their confidence for the next role. It happens to all of us. And so let's talk about ways that you can actually mitigate this internal critic and reduce imposter syndrome. How do you deal with imposter syndrome? The first and best way that I found to deal with imposter syndrome is to very simply write down the argument that that inner critic in your head is making. It's amazing how fast that argument evaporates when you actually take the noisy voice in your head and you make it put it down on paper and tell you and write out in the words exactly why you are an imposter. It's like, what is the evidence? It's like, okay, if you feel this way, if you feel you're an imposter, that you're in a role that you shouldn't be in, or you're looking for roles that you don't deserve, let's write down exactly why that you feel that. And when I do this, when I write down the reasons why I'm starting to feel anxious or distraught about being in an environment that I don't feel comfortable in, if I write down the things, I usually get like 2 lines written, and I can't go any further because there's nothing there other than a feeling. Anxiety comes from a part of our brain that doesn't know how to communicate with words. It just knows how to communicate with feelings. And we can't tell whether we're about to be attacked by a lion on the savannah or if somebody was mean to us in an email. We get the exact same emotional response both times. Thanks. But if you actually write down the words of the argument that you are an imposter, that you don't belong, that they're going to figure out that you don't actually deserve the role you're in, there's usually very few actual pieces of evidence to that case. And so the first thing, write it down, look at it, and if there are areas where you need to improve, then focus on those areas and improve in those areas. But generally speaking, you're going to find pretty quickly that you can't make this argument logically. The second thing to do is to realize that you are on a journey of growth. You grow into your role and you grow out of your role. And so it's very common that in the first 6 months of any new position that you take, you're going to feel uncomfortable because you are growing into the role. I had a manager once tell me a long time ago, I told him that I felt like I wasn't carrying my weight just yet, and I didn't feel like I was contributing to the bottom line of the company. And I asked him, how long should I, expect to take before I'm useful? And he said, it takes about 6 months for someone to get comfortable. And it's funny because I think back on that. I had been there all of 2 weeks and I was already contributing in a big way to the company, but I didn't feel like I was. And he knew what I was going through. So he gave me a time frame that was so long that if I got to 6 months and still felt that way, then yeah, maybe let's have a conversation. But the truth of it is that within a few weeks after that, I felt very comfortable and confident in myself, in my skills. And so I grew into that role. And so remind yourself that you're growing into a position. If you're the newly hired CTO, or if you're the newly hired director of operations, or you're the newly hired engineer, in every case, you're newly hired, and there's an expectation that it's going to take you time to ramp up. There's a whole process that we teach in my program about the first 90 days in any role. And there's a great book about it, but there's more to it. It's about establishing some quick wins for yourself and for the company to know that, yeah, you're going to be just fine in this role. And then also remember that you're going to grow out of this role too, and eventually you're going to start to think, well, maybe I'm ready for a different role, a different position. And so, like humans don't just hit a level and they are this role and then binary step up to the next level. We grow more analog into higher and higher level roles. And so just understand that you're going to grow into a role. It's going to take time. And so give yourself grace and providence to grow into that position. Another way to combat imposter syndrome is to realize that we're all just monkeys. We all put our pants on the exact same way, one leg at a time. I mean, there's probably some people who do it a little bit different, but the point is that we're all humans, right? We're born, we live, and we die. And we have this amazing shared experience. But when you're surrounded by really awesome people, they probably think you're awesome too. And the truth of it is that they're no more special or different or better than you. they grew into who they are just as you did, right? So we all started as babies. We all learned to walk and talk and so forth. Just remember, these people are not much different than you. They have different skills and experiences, and maybe they have more experience than you, but it doesn't change the fact that we're all humans. Steve Jobs actually talked about this early in his career. He was saying that he looked around and saw all these amazing inventions that had been built by great humans throughout the history of humanity. And he's thinking about these inventions, and he's thinking to himself, these things were all built by relatively ordinary people who may individually have been slightly more extraordinary than most people. But generally speaking, these are relatively average human beings that live and die just like the rest of us. And what that did was it gave him the confidence to go out and invent some of the most amazing pieces of technology that transformed human society over the last 40 years. From the personal computer, the inkjet printer of all things, the Mac, the iPhone, all these things were invented, by Steve and his team, but he wasn't like any different than you and I. He had a different vision. There were some things about him that were different, but he was still a human. And so for him, it gave him permission to go out and build amazing things once he realized that all of the amazing things that had ever been built were also built by relatively normal humans. So keep that in mind. That helps me a lot to think, well, why can't I build something that's amazing? And, I may not ever build another iPhone, but at the same time, the things I'm working on, the things that I think about, I think they're pretty valuable. And I'm willing to talk about them and share those ideas because of what Steve taught, which is this idea that everything is built by average human beings. And finally, the last way that I deal with imposter syndrome is to just quite simply ask other people around me, hey, do you think I'm good at my job? If you work with people that you like and trust and believe in, and you feel comfortable enough to be vulnerable in a moment with them, ask them, do you think I'm good at my job? Ask your supervisor, maybe in a more formal way, but you can ask your peers, do you think I'm good at what I do? They're going to look at you weird and be like, are you kidding? You're amazing. I love what you do. It's very rare that if you have the self-awareness and the confidence to ask that question of anybody around you, it's very rare that the response is going to be like, yeah, you're not very good at what you do, and we think you should leave. You'll never hear that. And the reason you won't hear that is because it's not true, right? Even the most blunt people, if they have a reason to not like you or not like what you're doing, they'll tell you in a blunt way, like, hey, I think you can improve on this thing. But very rarely are you going to get feedback that says, you're an imposter, you don't belong here, you need to go. It's just not how people operate. And so being willing to ask for that external validation, that external feedback, can help in times when you don't necessarily have that internal validation firing on all four cylinders. So be willing to ask your friends, your coworkers for a little bit of feedback on, am I doing a good job? Do you think that I'm in the right place? How do you think I can improve as a person? When you ask those questions, you get some external validation, some external feedback that you can then incorporate into who you are. And at the end of the day, you'll probably hear from more people than not that you're an amazing person, you're doing a fantastic job, and you're right where you belong, if not ready for another promotion or a move upwards from where you are right now. So tell me below how you have handled imposter syndrome in your career. If you've got some tips and tricks that we can all use to help when we get into those moments, I can tell you, shooting a YouTube video takes a lot of guts. And to be honest with you, I feel imposter syndrome a lot myself, just staring into the camera. So if you have thoughts and tricks and tips that I could find helpful, or if you think would be helpful to other people who are watching this video just like you, if you're a little bit further ahead in your journey than other people who are watching this, share below ways that you have handled imposter syndrome in your life. And just remember that it's common, it gets all of us, and there are ways to get past it. That's what I got for you this week, so I hope you have a great day.